Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the 9th EChapel webinar. So this evening, our moderator is none else than my dear sister, Olu Mien. She is an outstanding scholar, having studied political science at Long Island University, where she finished with first-class honors, and from there proceeded to Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where she obtained a master's in public policy. Olu has senior executive years in management, international oil and gas, energy, financial instruments across the range of sectors in the oil and gas industry, helping with finance, commercialization, policy design, and implementation. She did a lot of this while she was at Shell, where she led over $5 billion worth of transactions. And before then, she was with Moody's Investors Service in New York, evaluating risk of US public sector bonds. Currently, she's CEO of BFA Foundation, which she set up, a foundation that focuses on enabling the social and economic advancement of young Nigerians. So I hand you over to Olu, who would moderate this evening and take us through. Welcome to the 9th EChapel webinar, and happy Democracy Day. Olu.
Thank you, sir. A very good evening to all of you. I'm Olu Verheyen, and it is my immense pleasure to welcome you to the 9th COVID-19 webinar series organized by EChapel, and to also welcome this distinguished panel on this topic, mitigating the economic impact of COVID-19 and the path to recovery. By now, we're all familiar with the adverse effects of COVID-19, which include the unprecedented scale and depth of human suffering, evidenced by the rapid loss of life, health, and livelihood. Private firms have been deeply impacted by the collapse in demand and the supply chain disruptions, all increasing the likelihood of large-scale bankruptcies. A severe global economic recession on a scale that has not been seen in over 80 years. Though Nigeria has so far been relatively less impacted from a health perspective, it is estimated that 5 million of the nearly 50 million people who will be pushed into extreme poverty globally by COVID-19 are Nigerians. COVID-19 has further exposed the pre-existing vulnerabilities in our economy and our society. We are simply producing more Nigerians than we have the resources to cater for. As our population growth has outpaced economic growth, household incomes continue to fall, and the number of Nigerians living in abject poverty grows. Despite government efforts to combat unemployment, it is estimated that we need 30 million jobs over the next 10 years to simply maintain the current level of the current high levels of unemployment. Prior to this crisis, almost 60% of Nigerian household income was spent on food. It's one of the highest in the world. With the current economic downturn, we will see even more Nigerian households with fewer resources for basic needs, including food, transport, healthcare, and education. Today is Democracy Day. Nearly 60 years since we took our destiny in our hands, and 27 years after we showed up for that pivotal election with the hope of accessing the well-advertised dividends of democracy. This crisis presents us an opportunity to aspire to a higher level, far above our pre-COVID normal. We need urgent measures to limit the damage, rebuild the economy, and position for accelerated, resilient, and more importantly, inclusive growth. We need homegrown, market-relevant innovation to diversify our economy and improve the quality of employment that will move Nigeria towards prosperity for all. We are extremely fortunate to have this esteemed panel here with us on this momentous day, and we're looking forward to hearing their thoughts on how each of us in our respective businesses, institutions, and spheres of influence can contribute to the recovery and growth of Nigeria. So let me introduce you to them properly. Mrs. Ibukun Awoshika is the chairman of First Bank of Nigeria Limited. She's a multiple award-winning entrepreneur and the first Nigerian recipient of the prestigious International Women Entrepreneur Challenge Award. She's a member of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and served on the National Job Creation Committee. She serves on a number of corporate and nonprofit boards, including Cadbury and a few Convention on Business Integrity, the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. She chairs the boards of After School Graduate Development Center, a facility which she promoted to help address youth employability and enterprise issues in Nigeria. She is one of the WIMBIZ founders and a graduate of chemistry from the University of Ife. Thank you for joining us, Ma.
Thank you very much for having me.
Mr. Samaila Zubairu is the CEO of Africa Finance Corporation, the leading infrastructure development finance institution in Africa. He is an accomplished infrastructure development finance specialist with over 29 years of professional experience. Prior to AFC, he was the CEO of Africa Capital Management Limited. He was also the pioneer CFO of Dangote Cement and has led finance transactions over $3 billion. Mr. Zubairu is an Eisenhower Fellow and sits on the Eisenhower Fellowship Global Network Council, as well as the President's Advisory Council. He's on several boards and is an ICANN Fellow with an accounting degree from Ahmadu Bello University of Nigeria. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Ms. Hadiza Bala Usman is the outstanding Managing Director of the Nigerian Ports Authority, the first woman to hold that position, and her drive and excellent leadership has seen revenue generation by NPA at its highest ever, while improving significantly its operational efficiency. Prior to this, she served, as the Chief of Staff to the Governor of Kaduna State. She's a gender activist and a strong advocate of justice and fair treatment and fair and equal treatment of women. She's one of the leading voices for Bring Back Our Girls campaign. She has a bachelor's degree, also from ABU, in business administration and a master's degree from Leeds University. Thanks for joining us, Hadiza.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Uche Orji is the CEO of the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, where he currently manages over $2 billion. He brings a wealth of global experience in the financial services sector. And under him, NSIA has increased its focus on domestic projects in areas such as agriculture, healthcare, infrastructure, and enabling financial institutions via the Development Bank of Nigeria. Given his passion for expanding credit for infrastructure, he catalyzed the creation of InfraCredit. NSIA is a sponsor of 3 major transport infrastructure projects: the Abuja-Kano Highway, the Second Niger Bridge, and the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, worth over 500 billion naira. Prior to NSIA, he was the managing director of the Equities Division in UBS Securities. He also worked at highly reputable institutions such as JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Arthur Andersen. Mr. Orji is a chemical engineer, has a chemical engineer degree from the University of Port Harcourt and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let me start with you, Mr. Orji. Government recently, our Nigerian government recently withdrew $150 million from NSIA's 350 million stabilization fund to address our emerging fiscal risks. That's a strong indicator of limited fiscal space for stimulus, a condition not unique to Nigeria. We're familiar with NSIA's intervention in the healthcare sector with initiatives such as the Youth Cancer Center and the diagnostic centers in Kano and Umuahia. Could you kindly share the NSIA's plans to expand its intervention in healthcare sector and other sectors that target the basic needs of Nigerian households? And then the second question is really about how we catalyze additional funding given the scale of the intervention that is required and our limited sources of capital.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. So let's start with the question on healthcare. One of the things that's come out of this whole COVID-19 pandemic is it's focused our minds on the things that truly matter. At the NSIA, we've always described the domestic investment areas of focus as agriculture, healthcare, toll roads, power, and gas industrialization. The reality is that we were a little bit slow in deploying our healthcare investment plans. And quite frankly, at the moment, the first lesson is that we need to accelerate that. Our healthcare investment plans were really around the following three pieces of strategy. The first was to partner with teaching hospitals and federal medical centers to create centers of excellence. The second was to invest in pharmaceuticals, excluding the pharmaceutical chain, to ensure that we have the essential drugs that we have. And today, what's emerging from this whole pandemic is that this is now a matter of national security, because one of the areas that we've seen scarcity is that of essential drugs. The third area of interest for us is actually looking at diagnostics. Diagnostics for us, obviously, is very important to be sure that we have the right level of diagnosis across the country. And the plan was quite expansive. We had planned to build about 14 of these diagnostic centers and build about 6 different centers of excellence for various regions, depending on what the needs were. The other reason why we looked at healthcare was to address the whole idea of health tourism and people traveling abroad for essentials. And one thing was clear, there was a study we kept quoting, and this study was carried out back when we started in 2012. And that study showed that back then, Nigeria spent about $1 billion annually on medical tourism. And 80% of that went into 3 areas of therapy. One was oncology, third was nephrology, and the second was nephrology, and the third was cardio. The fourth was high-end surgery, but these 3 areas took 80% of the spend. So we started to tackle cancer treatment. And the first project we did was to build a cancer treatment center with Lagos University Hospital. And we wanted to go on from there to then do other things. And then we started with radiology and diagnostics with Kano and Umuahia, and all of these are running at the moment. What is clear is that we don't have enough of those. The second thing we did with Luth was to build a training center, because one of the things we found that was lacking wasn't just the equipment, it was actually the personnel that will run them. So we've done all that at Luth, and the idea was to use that as a springboard to now expand. And that plan is now being brought forward because we need to build that very, very quickly. Because what is clear today is people that have oncology problems at the moment can't really travel for treatment. So we all have to do that here now. So that needs to happen a bit more aggressively. On diagnostics, we want to build many more of this because one thing is clear at the moment, we've actually had to switch strategies a little bit by adding a couple of molecular labs, which we're going to put one in Lagos and then one in Umuahia, one in Kano, to increase the speed at which we can test for COVID-19 issues. Pharmaceuticals, we've been working with University College London to actually develop a pharmaceutical strategy, and we had wanted to start this year. Obviously, that plan is a little bit shifted, so sometime next year we will do that. So across the country, we will build out a few more of these things. And quite frankly, these projects are the center, at the intersection of both social and economic returns. Sadly, the reality is that these things tend to end up being profitable, but the reality is that it's also serving some needs. And I'll give you some statistics. If you look at our cancer treatment center at Luth, the cost of treatment is 25% of what you would spend if you went to Ghana. And we kept it that way to make sure that it's affordable and available to people. The equipment we have is set to be world-class by equipment suppliers who put them there. And so far, we're very happy with the results we have seen in that place. So now as we move on to pharmaceuticals, my idea had changed a little bit because initially we started with oncology medicine as the area we wanted to start, but now we're having to broaden the base. The reality is that this is not enough, and it's a little bit too little too late in terms of the situation we have to deal with today. And therefore the priorities are changing. Deploying some of these investments a little bit more quickly is now one of the things that will be very important for us as NSIA to focus on. Food, obviously, is next to healthcare, quite frankly, as in the situations we found ourselves. So the order of priority is now healthcare, agriculture. Of course, our toll road projects continue. Those are not going to change. Hopefully, we'll finish them on time, even though we've seen some delays because of the pandemic. We've lost a couple of months, but hopefully we can make that up. But our priority right now is in these three areas. And to answer your question, the objective now is to build out many more of these and hope that we can create enough solution for our people. Funding. One thing is clear today, it's a synchronized global recession that we're experiencing. The UK this morning announced a 20% decline in GDP. That's just a test of what's coming. Nigeria this morning, I was listening to the head of budget. We're running a 3 trillion naira revenue deficit for this year's budget. So borrowing is going to have to increase. The whole world is going to have to do that. The first priority the country has at the moment is to try and safeguard jobs. It's very important that we do whatever is necessary to support the industries that we need to support. Now, the second thing we need to do in terms of funding is to look inwards, because one of the realities of today's challenge is it's going to be difficult to mobilize capital because everybody is struggling. So we need to look inwards. We need to look inwards in terms of capital accumulation with pension funds. We need to look inwards with capital accumulation in places like sovereign wealth funds. We need to look inwards in terms of prioritizing our spending as a country. There are just so many fanciful things that may not be necessary anymore. And if we did all that, we might be able to accumulate a lot of capital. But we also now need to make sure that it's not dissipated. Make sure it's not dissipated and ensuring that we actually spend on the right things. And one of the examples is what we're doing with the road projects, Lagos, Ibadan, Second Niger, Abuja, Kano. There's a scheme we created called the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund. And that scheme took a little bit of money from the budget, some money from the NSIA, and we're raising third-party capital to make sure that those projects are funded. We have complete funding plan for these three projects at the moment, and we're hoping that we can complete all of them in early 2022, with Lagos Shagamu being targeted for end of next year. I know many of you in Lagos are struggling with that road, but end of next year is the target to make sure that it's completed. That is creative, and I commend the government for coming up with something creative. Hopefully we can do more of this, where we have more public-private partnerships at addressing infrastructure. At the moment, quite frankly, it's about prioritizing and making sure that we can mobilize domestic capital. I'll probably just stop here. I've taken more time to answer this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, that explains it's about prioritization and getting creative and doing away with some of the fanciful projects. And thanks for highlighting some of the points that around the critical things that are of importance to Nigerian households, example, healthcare. So the next question, first I'd like to let the audience know that if you have questions, please use the Q&A box in the Zoom section. And we'll pick up your questions there and be sure to direct it to the panelists. The second question is for Ms. Hadiza Bella Usman. The maritime sector's contribution to GDP lags behind that of Kenya. Our contribution is 0.05, I think, and then Kenya's is about 3%. And before the Benin border closed, there was probably 90% of their GDP. Now, this will continue to hurt government's aspiration to grow the non-oil sector and undermine the capacity of investors to benefit from Nigeria's growth potential. So what are some of the initiatives that you are undertaking at the Nigerian Ports Authority to improve the competitiveness of Nigerian ports in the sub-region and then the continent?
Thank you very much, Olu, for that. I would like to speak to the challenges we have around competitiveness. One of the things that we've seen globally is the need to have deep sea ports. These ports are the ports that enable larger vessels to berth in our ports. And Nigeria currently does not have any of the deep sea ports. By deep sea, I mean the ports that are able to take vessels that need the depth of draft of 16 to 17 meters, and we currently have just 30 meters. So this is a fundamental issue that challenges our competitiveness in the continent. And currently we're working with Lekki Deep Sea Port. They've signed a concession agreement. They're required to conclude by 2022. There are also initiatives around the Ibom Deep Sea Port. They're also concluding their outline business case, and there's a Badagry seaport that has been approved. So these are one of the key issues that challenge us as a country, because there's economies of scale. Currently, vessels are built in that large size to enable you take on the volumes that you require. So it's imperative for us to drive that and work towards providing the competitiveness in the port operations. In addition, I'll speak to the larger maritime sector where you have issues of utilization of dockyards. I think some of you will be familiar with the fact that vessels calling in Nigeria and operating in Nigeria would have their servicing and maintenance and repair works done in Nigeria if we had the skills and the competencies within our dock operations. So this is a huge problem. A lot of vessels that operationalize in Nigeria have to go to Senegal and Therma to service their crafts. And this is a huge part of the maritime industry. On our part, Nigerian ports, we last year granted a discount, a waiver for harbor dues on vessels that are going for servicing, and this significantly provided them with avenues to provide a competitiveness on if you can take your vessel to Therma or not. A particular operator called me and spoke directly about the fact that the dock operations, the dockyard in Ghana, reached out to him to say, why isn't he servicing in Nigeria in Ghana in this time? And he said Nigerian Ports has given him a discount, and he's able to use that discount to service his vessel in Nigeria. So on our part, we've done what we can to develop and increase operations in that sector, in that part of the maritime space. I think every other entity, i.e. government agencies and service providers, need to lean in on that, because this is a hugely untapped part of the maritime industry that will provide huge revenue, and it will be a huge employer of labor, and we look forward to having more of that being seen. And when you also see the need for us to improve on turnaround time for cargo, that's another area where we need to significantly improve. Some of the discussions around diversion of cargo, as we've seen, are attributable to cargoes that are banned in Nigeria or cargoes that have high tariff. But nevertheless, some people still choose to take their cargo, for example, to Benin, because you have a single windows, a national single windows that removes human interface within the cargo clearance system in the ports. And that is something that would take, on average now, when you look at what obtains in our ports, the Nigerian Customs Service, that is the lead inspection agency, actually inspect all cargoes physically, so that would automatically translate into a longer period. So we need to ensure that the single windows is deployed. We need to provide that electronic platform to remove human interface, and that human interface, beyond it being for operational efficiencies, it also removes the avenue for rent seeking, the avenue for corrupt practices. So reduction in human interface are key to reduction in corrupt practices in port operations. So yes, we need to have deep sea ports. Two, we need to look at other areas in the maritime sector beyond the direct port operations, but other attendant value chain, like the dock servicing that I referred to, and also providing the necessary electronic platform to leap us into where we need to be to catch up with our role in providing more to the GDP as expected of us. Thank you.
It's great to hear about those initiatives, because they're key elements in driving down cost of goods and services to Nigerians. Mr. Zubairu, the next question is for you. In a recent statement, you stated that Africa is positioned for transformational and beneficial change. What are the 3 top transformative projects, in your opinion, that will, whether they're in the, that you've currently done or in the near term, in your near-term plans, that will drive broad-based economic growth and recovery and economic growth?
Thank you very much for that question. I will start by just providing context on AFC. because I know that we're one of the least known institutions. So quickly, AFC, Africa Finance Corporation, was established in 2007 by a treaty of sovereign African states to create a multilateral financial institution that will provide pragmatic solutions to Africa's growing infrastructure deficit and challenging operating environment by developing and financing infrastructure, natural resource, and industrial assets, which enhance productivity and economic growth of African states. So since our creation, we have invested over $7 billion across 30 African states. We have increased our membership to 27 African states. We have invested mainly in energy, transport and logistics, heavy industries and telecoms, as well as natural resources. We are rated A3 by Moody's, so that gives us significant access to financial markets. Just on Tuesday, we priced a 700 million euro bond at 3.125% coupon, providing access for other African issuers to follow suit and access global financial markets. So back to the question around what we've done that is transformative on the continent. Our business requires investment in infrastructure and industrialization. And we think that that is what is required, for Africa to be able to create jobs on the continent for our growing population of youth. We're 1.2 billion people, and over 50% of the population is under 30 years old, and we need to find jobs for them. And the best way to do that is through value accretive beneficiation of African commodities, especially because commodities are largely bought, they're not sold. So it means that we don't have bargaining power in the price of our resources, and we need to change that. And we can only change that by doing value accretive beneficiation on the continent. So some of the projects that we've done to that effect, last year we approved, and this year we've disbursed funds for the Thor Gold project located in Ogun State. It's one of the largest structured mining projects in the country. And we're doing it essentially to prove the concept of mining as a business that can be financed with institutional capital. The deposit was discovered in 1945. And since then, over 2,000 ounces have been mined by artisanal miners. And the federal government has this objective of diversifying Nigeria's revenue base away from crude oil, which is why we're supporting mining of such scale. So we've committed $80 million to the project. We've disbursed the equity, and we're working with the rest of the partners to disburse the debt. It's important to note that at the beginning of this crisis, gold was trading at about 1,400. It's now about 1,700. Crude oil was trading at about $66. In the middle of the crisis, it went to as low as $19. It's now at about $38, but we still expect a lot of volatility. So it's important that we focus on our gold reserves and invest significantly in that space. Seguilala is a particularly important mining asset for us because it has one of the highest grade of gold in the West African sub-region. Typically, you see yields for gold of about 2.45 grams per ton. At the Seguilala mine, we have 4.2 grams per ton. So that is significant. And with working with the partners, we've been able to structure the operation such that the operating cost is about 30% lower than the usual operating cost for mining in the region. So we'll see that Seguilala will be a quite profitable operation for Nigeria. And to ensure that we can replicate this project, because we have significant gold reserves in Zamfara State, in Kaduna State, in Niger State, in Nasarawa State as well, we've been able to engage with central banks in the region, particularly in Nigeria and other West African states, to actually buy the gold from us. So when the gold is produced, we'll buy it. And we're also doing this because there will be a refinery at the place when it's done. It will be a market for all the illegal miners to bring their gold there. Instead of taking it to Dubai and getting peanuts, they can sell the gold in Nigeria for significant value. Another important project that we've done is the Dangote Refinery and Petrochemical Fertilizer Complex. That is a significant project for Africa. It's going to be the largest refinery on the continent. It would process 650,000 barrels per day. It will process 2.8 million tons of fertilizer per annum. Upon completion, we expect that it would boost GDP by $13 billion. So it would be a significant proportion of our GDP as a country. We think that it would improve Nigeria's trade balance by over $8.8 billion. We also think that it will increase government revenues by $3.3 billion. It will employ over 9,000 people in terms of direct jobs, and will create indirect jobs for over 30,000 people. I mentioned that this is significant for us because if you look at how Nigeria trades, most of our trading is export of crude oil, which has no value addition. And then we import finished goods. So I think that changing this would speak to some of the challenges we have and have experienced recently with the COVID-19 pandemic, where we see significant volatility in crude oil prices and the economic crisis that has ensued, especially because we're still recovering from the 2014-2016 crude oil volatility crisis that Nigeria is still struggling with. So with this pandemic, it exposes how vulnerable we are as a country if we continue to rely on crude oil and then import refined products. So this project changes all of that. And I think this is very significant for Nigeria. We have a couple of other projects in the pipeline that I will speak to. We're working with 2 states to see how we could help build metro rail. Metro rail is important. It's part of our core focus areas. It will move goods and services from place to place. It will reduce transportation costs, and it will generally enhance GDP for Nigeria. Now, one of the big stumbling blocks of transportation generally on the continent is that in Nigeria, it takes sometimes 4 times longer to get to where you want to get to because of the bottlenecks in our transportation system. And sometimes it costs 3 to 6 times more. So we hope that with these projects, we will be able to address those constraints that we have as a country. I think I'll just stop there so that I can take other questions and other panelists can also make contributions. Thank you.
We see the questions pouring in from the audience, and we will get to their questions as soon as we finish, as Mrs. Awosika has a chance to answer her opening question. Again, welcome. The question for you is, around the SMEs in Nigeria. So according to PwC, SMEs in Nigeria contribute about 48% of the country's GDP, and they account for 96% of businesses and provide 84% of total employment. This truly makes SMEs the engine of growth for our country. So my question is twofold. How do SMEs mitigate their losses during this crisis in order to survive? Things like eliminating their spend and what's to prioritize, sort of what Mr. Orji was talking about earlier, how to prioritize spend. Yes, you need to cut costs, but how do you prioritize as an SME? And then the second one is around what ways will the digitization of the financial system drive financial inclusion and make lending easier to SMEs?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me very clearly.
Yes.
Okay, because I took out the headphone. Now, starting with the SMEs, like you said, I mean, it's clear that SMEs are the heart and the center of the economy of most nations around the world. The percentages vary, but across the world, they're critical. And in Nigeria, they are very critical. I'll start by giving you, there's a study that Fate Foundation did in the middle of this pandemic to try and determine the impact of COVID-19 on Nigerian MSMEs. And they studied about 1,943 micro, small, and medium enterprises to determine the impact on them across the 36 states, including the FCT. And it shows that an overwhelming 94.3% of businesses surveyed reported being negatively impacted by the pandemic in particular. And maybe only about 47% of them think that they would recover from the pandemic. About 22% are not sure if they would recover. And about 30% were categorical in thinking that they don't think that they would recover. That's to give us an idea of the perception, even from the players themselves, of how the pandemic will impact their businesses and their ability to cope. Now, how can they move forward in the middle of this situation? I think there are many factors at play. The financial institutions, whether developmental or commercial like we are, or the micro finance institutions or grant giving institutions, will have different roles to play. There are many, in fact, part of their study, there's one part that will interest you, because there are quite a number of them that the cash flow, in terms of cash flow constraints because of the COVID-19 impact, only about 13% reported having enough cash flow to stay operational for 1 to 3 months, whilst about 33% had enough cash flow to stay operational for only 1 to 4 weeks. And about 27% said they had cash flow to stay on in business for 1 to 7 days. Now, what that tells you is there are different categories of people that fall into that whole group, and their sustainability is dependent on their access to capital. But the kind of capital that they need is different. For some, within the 90 days plus of the lockdown that is still continuing in some sense, they've completely consumed their capital, either for their domestic use and families and all of that. And having access to capital to reactivate their business is what will determine if they survive. For some, they cannot survive without letting go of staff, sort of controlling their costs, trying to find being lean and mean, and trying to find every way where they can survive as much as is possible, because there's an inductive effect in the market. Their customers are also impacted by COVID-19 itself, which means if they have any receivables, they're going to have a higher challenge trying to collect their receivables. The buying power of people is highly reduced. Therefore, their trading capacity is also reduced, because the market is only building up a little at a time. It's not at its maximum. So what needs to happen? The various financial institutions need to come into play. Let me take a First Bank, for instance, coming from the perspective of a commercial bank. For us to do well, our customers must do well. And for our customers to do well, we must be open to working with them to find how they survive the impact of COVID-19, which means that if you have your loan portfolio, it cannot be business as usual. You're going to have to work with different customers in terms of restructuring, reorganizing, giving them the room and the leeway that they need in order for their businesses to be reconfigured and to be restructured within the current environment to survive. That's the only way they're going to be able to pay you back. And in paying you back, their businesses, their paying you back is dependent on the survival of their business, which in itself will affect the economy of the country, because they're able to keep jobs, they're able to create economic activity, which will add value to the economy. Then there are those that we must just invest in. There are enough people at the lower end that you're just going to have to give them a grant, because for some of them, it's really about starting all over again. and you're going to have to kickstart them. One of the things I've learned, apart from being the chair of First Bank, my real life is as the founder and the CEO of the Chair Center Group, which I've built over the last 31 years. And so that's what keeps me in the real sector and makes me understand the issues of the people that we're talking about, because I run a manufacturing group. The same issues that we're talking about affect my own business as well in different ways, albeit at different levels. And I'm dealing with those factors on a day-by-day basis. And the survival of the business depends on our ability to respond structured and strategic to the issues that affect us in terms of your suppliers, in terms of your customers, in terms of, and in the Nigerian situation, it's not just about the COVID-19 issue. You also, because of the impact of the loss of income from the oil assets of the country, which has in itself impacted on our foreign exchange value, and there's a depreciation of at least about 15% or so in terms of foreign exchange rate, that's resulted in some level of inflation in terms of cost. And many manufacturing companies have some level of foreign components in their manufacturing at different levels, which means that in a contracted market, our cost of production is increased. You have a contracted market, your buyers don't have enough buying power, which means that they're looking for the best price that they can get, but it's at the same time that you as a manufacturer, you're having to deal with increased cost of production because of things outside of your control. So it's a mix of challenging issues, and it would take a lot of thinking through how to survive. But one great thing about Nigerians, I think we go to bed every night expecting something to happen one way or the other. And Nigerians have found a way over time to find solutions in impossible situations for businesses to survive. So I have no doubt that though the statistics look grim, like just 40-something% believing they can make it, most of the businesses will find a way to survive, whether it's support from family or support from the system, one way or the other, they would find a way to go. Now, going to the issue of digitalization and its impact on having inclusiveness in the financial services industry. I think over the last 3-4 years, all the banks have prepared almost as if they knew a moment like this would come. There's been huge investment in the digital platforms in order to support our ability to deliver services to the customers at different levels. If I take a First Bank story as an example, in the last 3 years, we've made huge investments in digital platforms to prepare ourselves to be leaner, to be more nimble, to be able to deliver a better service at lowest possible cost, considering the kind of retail base that we have as a bank. As a historical bank, because after 125 years, you're in more corners and crannies than most other banks are. And you're not quick to shut down branches, even as it looks to you sometimes like it's the easiest thing. So we found other ways to take advantage of the assets that we already have. And one of the things we've done aggressively is to invest in agency banking. As of today, First Bank has over 60,000 agents and still counting in all the 774, 76 local governments that we have across the country. There's almost no area where you will not find a First Bank agent, all of which played positively for us in the middle of this lockdown period, because it meant that you had the bank on your street or a street or two away that you could walk to get service delivered to you. And the backbone of the agency banking itself is a lot of technological infrastructure that we have invested in order to support our ability to deliver that value, and also taking extra value from the physical assets, the branch assets that we already have. Because if you have one branch that has over 1,000 or 2,000 agents attached to it, you're able to derive better value from that investment in that branch, as opposed to just servicing the people in the locality. with investment in digital assets as well, we've been able to support the emergence of a lot of fintech businesses, because that's also helping with inclusion, creating new opportunities. And the fintechs have the ideas, but they need the infrastructure that the commercial banks have. They need the retail network and the retail customer base that the commercial banks have. And being the largest retail bank in the country, you can imagine that that puts us in a good spot in terms of being able to respond to those needs. Yes, digital investments will continue for quite a while to play a major role in how we deliver banking. It helps to minimize the costs at which we're able to deliver our services to the last man at the last point. I mean, still working with some of the limitations that we have in terms of the spread of Wi-Fi and all of that across the entire country, which is part of what makes the agent very critical to the inclusive banking that we're trying to achieve. I hope that helps you for the moment.
Yes, thank you very much. That was very helpful, Ma. I think the next thing we'll move to now is we have a poll for the audience, and then I will start taking start asking some of the questions that have come in from the audience to this first part of the presentation. The audience, there should be a prompt for you to be able to click what this a response to this question. And the question is as follows: my household income has improved over the last 5 years. I think some of the things that we will also do is, Uche, I'll give you an opportunity to start preparing for your question while the poll is ongoing. Bimbola Wright has a question for you. Her question is as follows: it is excellent that asides equipment, NSIA is also developing human capacity to handle oncology interventions in youth. Once trained, what steps are being taken to retain talent in Nigeria? There's another question also related. How do the individuals that are either earning less than 30,000 Naira pay for hospitalization if they find themselves with any of the listed medical issues? Is the government prepared to assist without any charity assistance? That's from Professor Stella Williams. Is the poll done so we can close it? And there you are. Split down the middle. 58% say their income has improved. 48% say it hasn't. So a lot of what we're talking about really is around how we impact people's lives and grow their income with some of the activities that we're doing in these various sectors. So Uche, I'll give you the opportunity to answer those two questions around how people can, how we make these health services more affordable, and also how do we develop and retain talent outside of building the physical infrastructure. So the question is around what you build the physical infrastructure, but you also need to invest in human capital.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. Well, first, thanks for the commendation. I think there's still a long way to go in terms of making sure that this service is delivered to the level that we expected at the NSIA. But the only way we can make sure we retain these people is to create opportunities for them to actually practice in Nigeria. There are quite a number of things that I realized, because we collect a lot of data as we speak to the people that work at the center. One of the challenges many of them have is actually not having the right environment to practice their craft. And if there's one area Nigeria has competitive advantage in the United States, is medicine. So when you go to the United States, I was reading some statistics recently, and it could be wrong, but it's like more than 60% of Black doctors in America are said to be Nigerian. I haven't vetted that statistic, but it just sounded something like that could be quite possible. And that's based on what I know, my family members and people that I see when I live in New York. And so it's not just about retaining people, it's actually creating an opportunity for those who live outside, who want to practice in the country, to come back. There are two things that keep people in a workplace. Number one, people actually work for the benefit of themselves and their families. You have to pay them well. That's number one. Otherwise, they'll go somewhere else. And so the challenge we've had is creating an environment where we can actually pay competitive salaries for those people. And quite frankly, back to my point about how COVID is focusing the mind, it is time to realize who is essential and how much to pay them, okay? I'm not gonna say any more on that. But the point here though is this. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is providing an environment to practice. And we're looking to ensure that we grow many more of this. And I'm hoping, and I pray no one ever has to use these facilities, quite frankly, that's my desire. But it's important that if you find yourself where you need to use it, it is available. So in terms of retaining them, it's not that challenging, quite frankly, as long as you do those two things. And what I have found very encouraging in this whole experience is how many Nigerians who practice in New York, practice in Minneapolis, practice in California are writing me every day saying they want to come and do medical missions, they want to come and train people. We've had many such offers. We'll fly them in, they'll train the people, and then they'll leave. So as long as you provide these doctors the right environment, the right training, the right equipment, and the right level of compensation, quite frankly, you'll keep them. And so we're hoping that we will continue to do that. It's a bit challenging, quite frankly. There are many other systemic factors, but to my point, it's time for us to really realize who is essential and what do we do to keep them. Now, to the point about somebody earning 30,000 Naira and has these conditions, what will the government do? The reality for me, and these are the things I have seen, we've seen quite a few of those situations, and it's unfortunate and it's quite sad, quite frankly. And I think this is where we as a country and as citizens have to come together and do something. The government cannot carry all of this. There are systems in place today to address this, one of which is the NHIS, the health insurance scheme. And at the state level, there's also health insurance scheme. But my personal assessment is that the contribution is not enough. The contribution we all have to make to capitalize the NHIS is not enough. Frankly, that's my observation. I think we need to have a frank conversation about that. We need to have a frank conversation about health insurance and making sure we have well-capitalized insurance companies to play a role in providing support for people. But at the end of the day, quite frankly, and you see it even in developed countries, as we call them, charities are very essential. If we think our people are important, let's all pull together. Nothing stops people from coming together and creating a charity to support people at this center. We spent $12 million to build the center at Luth. For us to build many more of these, each of those, and that's because the land is in Luth land. It was a Luth Oncology Center we took over. If you had to build it brand new somewhere else, it could cost you slightly more. So, and it's not enough. It's not enough for a country of this size. In India, I was told there are 2,000 of such units as we have in Luth. We have just one. So we need to have many more of these centers across Nigeria to ensure that we provide the services we need. So private sector needs to come in, charities need to come in. There's an interesting charity I've seen that Fola Adiola and co were running that is helping, but we need many more of this, quite frankly. And we manage your money, so we need to earn a return so we can put that back. So if people can pull together to help, that's very much welcome. I'll stop there. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure what happened there. I got bumped off a little bit. Yes, thank you very much, Uche. So a lot more, you know, as you said, we have more to do and more work to do, and that's adequately answers the questions that that were posed. I think the next question is for Hadiza. Before we move into the next section of the panel, the next section is for Hadiza. So this is a question from an anonymous attendee. Regarding the need for efficiency of Nigerian ports, what are the actions being taken by NPA to enable collaboration with DFIs such as AFC to enforce the progress, to progress the development of ports? And then the other question was around how to make sure that this deep sea ports that you mentioned are also connected to the rail system to avoid evacuation by road as we currently experience.
Okay, thanks, Olu, for that. Regarding the issues on what we're doing to relate to DFI's degrade financing, one of the things that we've said on several fora and to the Federal Ministry of Transportation is the need to invest in the port operations, because no matter what you put in the rail is for cargo movement. So you need to have commensurate investment in port operations at the same time as rail. So while we're getting millions and millions of dollars in investment in rail, which would be movement of cargo, what volume of investment and what volume of funds are being earmarked for development of ports? These are some of the continuous engagement and I'll say debate we're having with the Ministry of Transportation, where they're unable to understand the direct linkage between a successful and modern port as relates to rail operations. So while you believe that there's a need to do aggressive development of rail, what would be on the rail line if you do not invest in having modern port operations, modern infrastructure in ports? So as we look at this debate and getting the necessary approvals, we are challenged to make them understand that, you know, these are things that need to go hand in hand. For every $1 million you invest in rail, you have to understand that there needs to be commensurate value of investment in port, because what are you going to put on the rail if you do not have improved port operations? So I'll say that we're reaching out to see what it is we need to do. But most important is for those that take the necessary approvals to understand that, you know, you can't do things in isolation. So for example, when you finish all your real investment, is that the time to start thinking that I need to invest in port operations? So while we in the port authority are doing what we need to do, but it's important for the larger federal government to understand there's a whole value chain. It's beyond investing in a particular side, but also understanding that there's a whole linkage of intermodal transportation system. And when we look at having improved infrastructure in the port, we also have to understand that the port must operate with intermodal, which would be rail, which would be inland waterways, that and pipelines for evacuation of liquid bulk. These are all the linkages that would provide the necessary outflow of cargo within the ports. And yes, while we would make the necessary recommendations, as I mentioned, it's imperative for decision makers to understand that these things are a whole value chain and have a whole circle for us to deploy. Regarding the development of deep sea ports, we Nigerian ports we're keen to provide regulatory oversight. One of the things that I had brought in when I assumed is the need to refrain government from investing directly. And typically when you see a project where government has high investment, is something that really scares away private sector. And I think government needs to stay out of business. Government's job is not to be in business. So the less shareholding you own within any port operations, the better it is for the developer to get the necessary financing and for you to not get into interfering, but to provide the enabling environment for that port to operate. By enabling environment, we mean ensure there's a level playing field, ensure the regulations are applicable and sustained, and ensure, most importantly, there's sanctions and penalty for performing and non-performance. And this is on both sides. Some of the issues that we've had is that we have situations where government does not fill in their own obligations. So it's imperative that government recognizes that for every time you don't meet up your obligation of dredging the channel, for every time you don't meet up your obligation on improving on the infrastructure, there's a clear and direct, I'll say, sanction mechanism around revenue generation. So those clear penalties of non-performance on both sides are imperative as we go towards providing the enabling environment and providing the regulatory oversight for such operations to exist. Some of the, I'll say, feedback we get is the concerns about flip-flop in policy. You come into a port operation and you're required to have dry bulk, for example, and then the government goes ahead and there's a ban on all such cargo types. So automatically your business plans are skewed from day one. So these are some of the things that we need to mitigate while government has its policies, but recognizing the investment of the investor in port operations, you need to give them the necessary sanction, the necessary cushion, or the necessary, I'll say, understanding that the investment were done based on certain projections attributable to a particular cargo type.
Thank you very much.
Olu, have I answered the question?
You more than answered it, Hadiza. Thank you very much. I think you've touched on many things there about, you know, accountability on both sides, and and drawing more linkages so that we can actually we can get more out of our government spend.
Olu?
Yes. Hello. 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 Can you hear me?
Okay, now I can.
Okay. Yes. So I said no. Thank you. You more than answered the question, and and it's really, it touches on many points around accountability, accountability on both sides, on the public and private sector. I have a point from a comment really from Dr. Kabueze, the Director of Budgets, where he says the way forward on public healthcare must include compulsory contributions by all income earners to the NHIAS, regardless of whether the contributor chooses to use the NHIS to address their healthcare. I think this was in relation to Uche's point earlier about the robustness of insurance to improve access to healthcare, to the healthcare systems that we're trying to invest in. Thank you, Dr. Kabueze. I think the next question also is for Sumaila, and it's a two-part question, and it transitions us well to the next sector. And I'm going to ask the panelists to try to, because we're an hour in and we still have quite a few questions that are coming in from the audience, to try and keep their responses shorter so that people have an opportunity to really engage and feel like a lot of the questions that they've had on how this could impact their lives have been answered. So the next question is for you, Sumaila. Agriculture remains, it is from Mr. Yemi or Miss Yemi Akimbamijo. Agriculture remains a latent contributor to African economic growth. It is one sector that has the capacity to handle the growing youth unemployment challenge. Nigeria is particularly well placed to draw on this massive potential for growth. Is AFC looking at this sector that is currently exploited by non-Africans? Are there other examples across the panel of investments into the value add across the value chain, such as agriculture, that are opportunities for individuals in this webinar? And they should look forward to getting involved. And the next question for you, Sumaila, I'll just combine both, is from Dr. Nkiru Ballon. And the question is as follows. The companies that have stood out during this pandemic have been technology and content-focused entities like Netflix, Disney, Zoom, WhatsApp, TikTok, Amazon, none of which are African. How are the AFC and NSIA taking the opportunity to redefine the meaning of infrastructure, considering that also the creative industries are second only to agriculture when it comes to the area of youth and job creation, and keeping in mind that access to technology can propel a nation forward much faster than oil. So question around agric and how that can, you can have more participation by Africans in that value chain. And the second around technology, the investments in infrastructure.
Good. Thank you very much. All very good questions. So I'll start with the first one, agriculture. So directly, we don't invest in agriculture, but we invest in processing of agricultural produce. So what that means is that we can provide offtake for primary producers along the value chain, because agriculture is a value chain. You have the primary production, you have the storage, and then value addition. So we, through our logistics business, can invest in the storage and in agro processing. And we've done that in other jurisdictions where we've worked with governments and sponsors to increase value addition and job creation as well, increasing significantly revenue earned from just exporting primary commodities to processing it and also exporting it. So in some cases, we've seen a growth of almost 5 times in the revenue earned in processing. So we will focus on processing because we have an ecosystem strategy going forward, because we understand the linkages between infrastructure and all forms of production. So we would provide storage, we would provide and support industrial parks to process agricultural produce and also create jobs. So for us, that is all we can do. But we can't do it by ourselves. We have to work with partners. And if we see strong partners that have this ecosystem approach, we would support them. We're actually working with our partners in other jurisdictions and interesting them on doing business in Nigeria. Just to give you context. So about 70% of the world's cocoa is in West Africa. Similarly, I think about 70% of the world's cashew is also in West Africa. So we want to be able to process those to finished goods. These are all agricultural produce, but we would not engage in farming, but we would engage in the processing, because we think that these opportunities create jobs for Africans and Nigerians in particular, because Nigeria has significant cashew and also has significant cocoa. And for us, even if we can't export them, let's consume what we have so that we don't need to import what we are currently importing. So that we would support. We're also looking at cotton as well, processing cotton, so we can invest in ginning and textiles. So we can do the upper end of the value chain, and we are actually doing that now. We have a couple of initiatives that we're looking at that should support those. So if people have ideas, they should feel free to talk to us. If we can look at it from a value chain approach, we would like to support those initiatives. Now, the question on technology and creative industries. We've actually created a fund focused on Nigeria of over 500 billion naira, focusing on technology, telecommunications, creative media as well. So we support those initiatives. We are currently now doing the groundwork. We're doing all the studies to understand how best we can intervene. And we chose those areas because we know that it has significant opportunity for job creation and also value addition in the economy. We have seen the growth of Nigerian music, Nigerian movies, and we think that we should support this. If you remember, we're one of the first investors in Meanwhile. And the whole idea of that investment was to provide, I would say, infrastructure for both telcos, ISPs, data centers, and all of that, which should provide the backbone for broadband internet, and upon which the creative media and creative industries can be built upon. So we are in that space. It's a new one for us. So we're trying to see which partners we can work with, and we're open to work with partners in that space. Hello, Olu?
Sorry, yes, unmuting.
So did I answer the question? Or there are other perspectives that I left out?
Why does she keep muting me? Yes. No, it does answer the question. The question is around, yes, it answers the question. So we're basically talking about how we transition from, being an export commodity to creating more value-added services to a lot of the raw materials that we have and are so endowed with. And then you've talked about import substitution, and then the criticality of investing in infrastructure, broadband infrastructure that's going to drive the digitization of the rest of the economy. Thank you very much. And the last question is for Mrs. Awoshika. What practical steps can SMEs take to be future ready? Oh my God, what's this? What practical steps can SMEs take to be future ready? Winners will need to reorient their strategies based on the conversations that we've had today, and start moving into this value chains and looking for ways to access this value chains. And especially the ones that are positioned in the value chains that are essential commodities and the essential commodities verticals. So food, education, and a lot of the other things that we've had the other panelists talk about. So the question is really what are the practical steps that SMEs can take today to start positioning themselves to access these opportunities going forward?
Okay, thank you very much, Olu. I think the place to always start is to have a clear understanding of the value chain within your own industry, because you can't prepare yourself for what you cannot anticipate. If you know the value chain within your industry, you will, if you do a gaps analysis as well, you would see where the gaps are and the opportunities that are still left on the table, or the areas where there's opportunity for growth. And if you combine that with what you think will be the trend of the market and the capacity of your business as it is structured right now to respond to those opportunities when it emerges, it becomes important that you begin either to realign, reset, or to begin to prepare yourself to have the necessary resources in skills, in knowledge, in the right network to be able to play in where you think the opportunity will be where there will be the greatest opportunity going forward. In reality, one of the best things that can happen to you in business is to never be satisfied with just where you are, but to have the capacity to anticipate the market ahead of the emergence of that particular opportunity. And sometimes you're the one that is going to tease out that opportunity or force it out by the way that you respond or you begin to push for that opportunity. The other thing that is key is to find the right alliances, because in every case where you're talking about value chain extraction, there are always players that are key in that value chain, who are either the takers or the givers of the opportunity. And you must find how you key in order to be able to work with them and to play within that chain in itself. Sometimes it will require a complete change of your business direction, because sometimes the path that you're in might have served you well for now. I mean, look at what happened over this COVID-19 period. A lot of companies that were focused on school uniforms, that were focused on fashion wear for children, for women, for men, all of a sudden realized that we had a great opportunity for them to use the same machinery that they have, the same skills that they have, to fill in a gap that was a national need. Making PPEs, creating masks, creating a lot of solutions that were required within the health sector became a major mainstay for companies that had those. But it was about thinking fast enough and not getting stuck in thinking, no, I make fancy clothes only. I only sell to high-end fashion people. I only make school uniforms. No. People were flexible enough to reorganize and restructure themselves for the market that emerged. And a lot of SMEs would have to learn that one of the ways that you grow is your ability to respond to the situations in the market and how to use the talents that you have and tweak it to fit into the needs in the emerging market where you're playing. And if you can think it right and identify the opportunity and the linkages, usually you can also find the funding. Because don't forget that those that hold the fund do not hold it for decoration. Banks don't have money just to have it in their vault. They only make money by giving out their money. But they also have the responsibility to secure it. And there are also many individuals who have money just sitting in the bank, earning low interest right now, that would rather find some equity investments where they can make better returns. But you have to make a case for the idea that you have, because you have, by anticipating the situation, put together a business plan that is attractive enough for you to attract the right kind of investment to support your ability to move in that direction. So you can't sit and wait for the opportunity to fall on your lap. Stay ahead of the market and think of how you can tease out the new opportunities that exist within it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma. So the message to a lot of questions have come in around how we position, and a lot of around businesses, people wanting to know what to do with their businesses. So you've heard it. Be creative. Make sure that what your business is trying to solve is market relevant, and actually much more importantly relevant right now, and so that it can attract the funding. And then also make sure that you're structured appropriately, and be proactive in seeking the support that you need for success. I think the next thing we'll move to is the second poll. that we have, which is it basically is it ties to the point that the main thing that we've been discussing, right? Everybody wants to know what they can do to access better opportunities. So we'll put up that poll, and while that poll is up, the question is as follows: I'm currently equipped or informed to access opportunities to improve my livelihood and household income? Yes or no? And while that question is up, I would like to take a moment to welcome His Royal Highness Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, the last Emir of Kano Emirate, and the former CBN the former CBN governor to this webinar. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Olu.
And the former chief executive.
Exactly, your former CEO, ma. Yes. Exactly. Thank you very much. So the question, I think that's going to take some time because we need infrastructure, and people need to be a little bit more. We'll start transitioning to the next question. We'll start transitioning to the second half of the seminar, of this webinar. And it's basically around drawing these linkages that we've already started drawing, right? So everybody's listening to these big ideas and these big plans, and they want to know how the work that is being done, whether it's at First Bank or your experience as a SME, whether it's at NSIA or AFC, is basically how do we make sure that we understand the linkages between these plans and that we are taking tangible actions to survive this current crisis, but also position ourselves to thrive post the crisis. Wow, that is, I think that's encouraging, that it's close to 60% of people who understand how they need to position. So thank you to our panelists. Your ideas and your plans seem relevant to the bulk of our audience, but we still have 40% who, hopefully by the end of this webinar, are better informed about what they need to do to access these opportunities, to position for growth. The next question, is for Hadiza again. Again, the port is so critical to our growth. And it ties into this conversation that we've had around digitization. Not only does it help with driving down the cost of goods and services, it also is very critical to repositioning us as an export country. We've heard many conversations today about how we're going to transition and diversify our sources of foreign exchange. So what are the ways in which MPA is leveraging technology to facilitate trade, particularly intra-African trade, to drive down the cost of services for our audience? Rice is a big import. How do we lower that cost? A lot of our audience members will be exporters of various commodities. They've heard many things that are happening, whether it's gold, and many other things that they're going to position and try to access going forward. So how do they, as exporters in this new economy, value-added products, access the export market more easily based on the initiatives that you're driving at the MPA?
Okay, thanks, Olu. Indeed, we need to improve on the ICT deployment within port operations. The respective layers to ICT operations are one regarding payment platforms, which Nigerian Ports Authority has done very efficiently. In the last 3 years, we've been able to amplify and have all payments that need to be made to the authority on e-platforms. So that is easy. You're able to synchronize and see what payments are needed for you and how you should do them within that platform. The other area is to have all other agencies of government also operate in that way, meaning that we need to develop the ports community system and indeed the national single windows. One of the things that we need to do is to get the other agencies primarily Nigerian customs, to understand that what we have within the systems that they're deploying currently is not a national single windows. The single windows enables all agencies of government come in and do all the services they require to do within that platform, and that would significantly improve on trade facilitation, especially for exportation. So situations where you have agri-produce being brought into the ports, and it is when they arrive, for example, Lagos, that they start making their documentation, doing custom clearance, doing getting the necessary documentation from Ministry of Agriculture. So all of these things now need to be automated, and while to the minds of every Nigerian, if your cargo comes to Nigeria and it doesn't get to your warehouse, you immediately link it to Nigerian ports. But it's important for us to understand that the clearing aspect, which is key to getting cargo out of the ports, is led by Nigerian customs, and we are working very closely with them to push them so that they can understand the impact it has. We recently had to institute a policy where, in fact, the terminal operators are pushing for it, that no export cargo should come towards the port without having done all their documentation. So literally they drive into the port and they're packing, waiting to do their paperwork. And these paperwork are paperwork that need to be automated. We have leaned into the Presidential Council on Enabling Business Environment, PBEC, that is driving and ensuring that all agencies come together to streamline and provide that avenue. So on our side, we are keen to deploy that. We've deployed what is applicable to us, but as I keep saying, the value chain is not complete if every other agency of government doesn't lean in and provide that automation. So that is imperative. The Vice President is leading on that, but I think we need to make more traction, because that challenge is huge when it comes to exportation, and more so when it comes to looking at exportation of agri-produce and other solid minerals. So yes, automation is very, very key. And as I said, when I first spoke, some of the pushback around the automation has to do with removing human intervention. And when there's no human intervention, it's very difficult for you to rent seek with a computer. It's very difficult for you to fill a form and try to extract some form of rent-seeking engagement when you're doing, when that automation exists. So this is something that is very, very crucial. We within, as I said, within our own operations have pushed to where we limit our own activity, but that would not be important, or that will not be successful if we don't link it holistically and have that full system that people can utilize without having to fill out forms and go from desk to desk and push people to sign off things. I think we need to completely move away from that in Nigeria. And right now, we're the only country in the West African coast that has not pushed and concluded on this full automation. And Nigerian Customs, being that lead agency, needs to drive that. And as I said, we need to have the highest level of government understanding this and giving timelines, deadlines, and also consequences for inability to deploy. I think some of the issues we have are attributable to lack of consequences for action and inaction of agencies of government. So we need to be held accountable, and we need to ensure that we deliver what it is that is expected of us by citizens, to ensure that those full circle deployment and full circle service are provided in an efficient manner. So I'll just stop here.
Thank you very much, Hadiza. Very helpful to understand how some of the work you're doing there will definitely help us drive and reshape our economy. I think the next question is also for Uche, which is just basically helping the audience understand, you have extensive programs planned and with a reprioritization. So the question really is around what are the practical steps that our audience can take now to better position themselves in the value chain of some of NSIA's projects. Yeah.
So talking through that will require going through a wide range of things. So let me pick up on the question that I thought had been addressed to both myself and Samuel, and use that as a platform to explain a few things.
Right.
So let's talk about agriculture for a minute. Many of you are not aware, and quite frankly, part of it is because we don't announce too many of our programs, as make too much noise about it. Not that we don't announce them; they're all very transparently announced. But we've been running the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative for the last 3 years, which was a program that we took on as a way to help the government, and the idea was to enable local production of fertilizers. And that program has delivered 1 million metric tons over the last 3 years and 600,000 metric tons targeted for this year. Just to give you an idea, this year alone will require something in the order of 20,000 truck movements just to move the raw materials. We've enabled the creation of more than 31 blending plants from less than 4 operating when we started this program. So that's domesticated that manufacturing locally. And along the whole chain, I think we've been tracking certain data about how many jobs were created and all that. And we're working with the Fertilizer Producers Association on that. And that's creating something in the order of maybe about 50,000 jobs. So there are quite a number of things along those lines. Agriculture in itself is an area where we are willing to partner and work with a lot of people. One of the things we've done recently, we partnered with a Dutch company to invest in primary production and feed meal production in Nasarawa State. It's a farm that was not doing well. We bought it as NSIA and a Dutch company, and we're growing it now. So targeting 140,000 metric tons of feed meal. We're expanding the plant, and so there are opportunities to partner with us in agriculture. And across many of the things that we do. One of the areas that I think people might look, so the practical question is, how do you partner with us, right? So we have invested in practically every private equity fund that is in this country. And His Royal Highness chairs a company that we invested in recently called Babangona's job is to aggregate small stakeholder farmers and create a scheme that is equivalent to a local commodity exchange, which is really fantastic. And we've invested in that. So come up with your ideas in agriculture. We invest through private equity funds and we invest through co-investments, but there has to be a certain size and scale. Otherwise, we're going to spend our time running around looking at small deals. And that's not really something we like to spend our time doing. So across the entire chain, work with us. Now, the other thing we've done at the NSIA is to enable the creation of financial institutions. And we enabled the creation of NMRC, which is a mortgage refinancing company. We enabled the creation of family homes funds, which is building low-cost housing across the country. Infracredit has been mentioned, which we actually, from day one, put together with Coin Ajayi's firm, Olaniwa Ajayi, as our legal advisor. We've also created the Development Bank of Nigeria. We were instrumental in putting that together. The DBN's job is to provide funding to small and medium-scale enterprises because we can't go directly into that. But the DBN does by providing funding, low-cost funding, relatively low-cost funding to the microfinance entities. So we're targeting loans of 2 million, 3 million naira for those who are in the lower end of the society. So these are all opportunities. We have to work by way of leverage. And that means we don't have to get ourselves directly interfacing with the customers, but we walk through some of these institutions we've created. So along those lines, from the very high-end private equity all the way to the small and medium-scale enterprises will play a role. And finally, let me speak to the impact of the work going on in Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, Second Niger Bridge, and the other projects. These are areas where we are very keen to support local participation, but obviously you have to talk to the contractors directly, but we work to ensure that we encourage that. And this is because there are quite a number of metrics we look at. And one of those metrics is the impact that these projects have on people, jobs created, impact on small and value chain companies along those lines. So these are the things that we look at. So practical steps for the NSIA, quite frankly, is to look through most of the things that we're invested in. If you are part of a fund, it's actually a lot easier for us, but there are opportunities across those chains. And this is a time for people to be creative as to how they want to participate. So I'll stop here. I don't know if that answers the question. Maybe I should speak in a little bit more on other things.
No, thank you very much. It does. It basically shows the different ways in which NSI, as you said, the scope of what you do is so broad that and it highlights the different ways in which people should think, and it ties into Mrs. Awoshika's point earlier, which is just people need to be a little bit creative and proactive about how they manage, start thinking about how to access some of the opportunities that have already been discussed as widely, and also take some time to educate themselves where some of these opportunities might lie based on what we've talked about here today. The next question is for Samaila, and it's basically just, the infrastructure gap in Africa is so wide between, and so the question really is, what will AFC do differently to access capital, to catalyze investments and close that gap. Sorry, 1 second.
Okay, thank you for that. So again, our business model is one in which we're constantly seeking capital from a diverse source as is possible, also from as low a cost as is possible. I'd mentioned earlier on that we recently did a Eurobond just this week on Tuesday, where we printed $700 million transaction for 3.125 coupon, and I think a yield of 3.25%, which demonstrates access to markets. This is our 5th Eurobond. This was actually the most successful on the back of our very strong, impressive 2019 result, where we grew asset base and profitability by 36% and 38% respectively. So that gave us very good access to the market, irrespective of the volatile nature of markets presently. We also have very good relations with development finance partners across Europe and Asia. And we are accessing capital from them on an ongoing basis. And again, we've not seen any increase in pricing from those institutions, irrespective of the current volatility in financial markets. And of course, we are a profitable institution, so we retain capital from our business as well to support our growth. And we invest along the entire spectrum of the capital structure. So we do development, we do equity, we do debt, we do mezz as well. And we're focused on development because we believe that one of the ways to increase infrastructure investment is to create those bankable projects. And just to put context into that, Africa requires 170 billion to invest annually on infrastructure. And if you look at that, 69 billion is required for water and sanitation, 50 billion is required for energy, 47 billion is required for transport and logistics, and about 7 billion is required for ICT. I think as a continent, we've managed to cross the $100 billion mark recently. So we still have a deficit of 70 billion. And this deficit doesn't allow us to trade properly. So for example, I saw a question on how prepared we are for the Continental Free Trade Agreement. We're not very prepared because we don't have infrastructure and we don't have the level of industrialization that's required. But we're working with several partners, like I mentioned, to build our capacity. We're advising governments, we're advising clients to focus on import substitution. I think that we have a gift with this COVID-19 pandemic, whereby we've seen a disruption in global supply chain. I think it's an opportunity for us to build production centers closer to sources of raw material and closer to markets. This is an opportunity for Nigeria in particular to do most of the pharmaceutical products that we require, to produce most of the PPE that's required, and to have a basic stock of production. And I think if we have to provide incentives, as has been done already. So for example, part of the intervention of the federal government was to provide targeted funding for pharmaceuticals, targeted funding for SMEs, targeted funding for industrialization. So I think there's $1 trillion naira for industrialization, 100 billion for healthcare, and I think another 50 billion for SMEs. So I think all of these funds together with us, NSIA, would all help provide that capacity. We, again, are focused on infrastructure and industrialization, and we're always keen to work with partners to do projects. I mean, that's our business. So we are always open to do projects. So as people come to us with ideas, we can help, because we don't really wait for big projects. We can work with you to get the projects ready. And we have a facility for working with people to get the projects ready. So we're open, and we really want to help. So if people should feel free to come to us and we'll provide the assistance that is required.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful for people to understand that they don't have to have the fully baked idea yet, but sufficient enough to engage. And the support is there from AFC for them to access some of these opportunities. Then the next question, His Royal Highness Lamido Sanusi Lamido has a question for the panelists and would like to, and would also invite him to share his views on what we should be doing to access and position for growth, access opportunities and position for growth. Your Royal Highness, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks, Olu. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so let me start by congratulating the panel, Ibukun, Hadiza, Samaila, Uche. I mean, clearly you represent the best this country has to offer, and congratulations. This has been a very wonderful session. Olu, thanks for excellent moderation. And I do confirm that Uche has given Babangona significant support, and we have been working with small-scale farmers, moving them from subsistence to commercial farmers. So NSIA has actually devoted resources to the real sector of the economy. What I'd like to I'd like to share is basically put on the table two questions from a macro perspective, and hope ask the panel for a reaction. The first is when we talk about the nature of the fiscal crisis we're facing and where Nigeria is headed post-crisis, we need to ask ourselves fundamental questions about the manner in which we have structured the federation and the cost of running the government. I mean, if you're a company and you had extremely high overheads and you need a high contribution margin to break even, you'll be looking at how to reduce costs. So we have a constitution that says we have a president and a vice president. We must have a minister from every state of the federation, whether or not we need 36 ministries. We have 109 senators, 360 members of the House of Representatives, 36 governors, 36 deputy governors, each state with a state assembly, 774 local government chairmen, each local government with 10 councillors. Add all the PAs and SAs and staff and vehicles, and you are already set up to be bankrupt. Okay, now this is something I've been talking about for years. We need to ask ourselves, the structure that we have, does it leave us any option other than to remain unsustainable over time? And this is the kind of conversation I think we need to have as a country. Do we need a bicameral legislature? Do we need 500 legislators in Abuja? Do we need the hundreds of state legislators? What are they doing? Do we need all these local government chairmen and councillors, or do we need to look at that structure? Because right now, I mean, even at the best of times, when I was in central bank with oil price at over $100 a barrel, the government was spending 80% of its revenue on salaries and overheads. Now, I'm sure with the 3 trillion shortfall in revenues and where oil prices, after debt service, we probably have to borrow to pay salaries. Now, we've got to look at that structure. Now, it doesn't mean reduce workers. I mean, from the way I see it, you can reallocate, for example, civil servants into areas like education and healthcare, rather than have them sit down in administration. So you're not just the cost, but actually increasing the productivity. That is one point. The second point, not to take your time, is on infrastructure. We've got so many infrastructure requirements we've got to prioritize. And what I would like to ask the panel is, what if this country decided that it would focus on, say, 2 things, simple things like electricity and telecommunications? Okay, so Samaila just mentioned they're part of main one. You and I know that it costs less to bring broadband from Portugal to Lagos, and it is costing to take it from Lagos to the rest of the country. Everybody's charging rights of way, the governor is charging, the local government is charging, communities are charging, and we don't realize that by making it easy to have internet penetration, you make much more money creating jobs, freeing the government from liabilities, having taxes, creating innovation, and so on. What can we do to address these fundamental structural constraints that get in the way of sustainability in the fiscal space? Those are my 2 questions, and I will look forward to an answer from this brilliant panel. Once more, congratulations. It's been extremely enlightening, and I'm very happy I took my time and listened to this.
Thank you very much, sir. As always, you never disappoint. So yes, the floor is, so the question to the panelists, I think Samaila, Uche, Hadiza, anybody that wants to jump in, please feel free. The challenge has been thrown.
Okay, I will start.
Yeah.
Because the last question was the infrastructure. And I hear His Royal Highness on the questions the conversations that we should have as a country on our structure of government. That is really, he's hit the nail on the head. And I think that we need to have that conversation. But I don't know that this is the exact forum for this, because I don't think we can exhaust that conversation in the next 3 hours.
Absolutely.
So very quickly, I'll just say that it's a conversation that we need to have. Maybe we need to have a specific webinar on it. But this time around, we should invite the actors, because I think it's important that the actors are also in the room so that we can have a more, I would say, robust conversation with them. Clearly, from a financial perspective, what we're doing doesn't make sense and it's not sustainable. And even if we continue to grow, even if we're able to grow the revenue base. So for example, one of the challenges I've had is that we're using the same revenue as a country for 200 million people as we had when we were 90 million people. I remember in 1991, where 90 million people were producing 2 million barrels of oil per day at the market prices at that time. Today, we're 200 million people and we're still producing 2 million barrels per day. So clearly, the money can't even be enough, even if we did do anything else. But at that time, we didn't use to import fuel. At that time, we didn't have the expensive government that we currently have. So clearly, we need to have a conversation on this. So back to infrastructure. I think the priority for any economy really has to be energy and transport. And if we look at global trends, 42% of the investments in infrastructure is in energy. 38% is in transport. So if we need to prioritize, those are the areas that we should prioritize. Transport can actually include telecoms as well, because if you're looking at the right of way, you're looking at fiber optic, you're looking at tunnels, it can be seen as part of transportation. But with the advancement now, you have to classify it as maybe ICT. So I would say that we should focus on energy and transport. And for energy, we made significant progress as a country, but we just stopped and we dropped the ball. And since then, nothing has happened. And what is required to move the needle now is really leadership. I was having a conversation with Olu earlier on. She wanted me to talk about energy, and I told her that this was a difficult conversation to have without having the actors present, because really, without the actors, we'll be saying the same things and talking to ourselves, and it has not moved anything, has not changed anything. So we need to have the actors in the room, and let's have a conversation with them on what's required. And really, again, it's another area where we need leadership. Leadership because, I keep telling my colleagues when I was deeply in the energy sector, that if we cannot explain the price of electricity to Nigerians in a way that they can understand it and pay for it, how do we imagine we can convince Nigerians to fight a war? Because really, that's what leadership is about. You need to explain to people what a product is, what the value chain for the product is, and how much it costs. So I think energy is one area we should prioritize. I've mentioned transport. Transport is so important because it moves goods and people, it facilitates trade, it facilitates agriculture, it facilitates several things, facilitates export. So if we should prioritize, I will prioritize energy and transport.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Samaila. Uche, you have a comment as well? And apologies to the audience. I know we're running late, but this is an engaging conversation, but we'll bring it to a close shortly. But Uche, you go with your comment.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And thank you, Your Highness, for your intervention and the comments you made. To your first question, I'm sure you are the only one who can ask that question, and you're the only one who can answer that question. And along with Samaila, we'll probably take that offline. But I'll just say there are certain situations you come to, even if you're a business manager, and it forces you to look at the structure of a business and have to address certain things. And I think a crisis like this is one we should not allow it to go to waste. It should force our minds to really address our problems. Otherwise, we may not be able to we may not be able to come out of this stronger, and we should come out of this crisis like this stronger with the right approach to our business. On the infrastructure side, I'll just add one thing, and that is, yes, I believe in focusing, I believe in prioritizing what you need to do. But I also believe that one of the things we've done, I like to reemphasize this, which is to pull 5 projects out of the budget and use that, use a public-private finance structure to finish those projects. We saw that Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, Second Niger Bridge, these things have been in the drawing board for 30 years, 40 years. Every year there's a 5% allocation to the budget. It never gets done. You know, you mobilize, you demobilize. And so what we've done is just take it off the budget. If you look at the budget in 2019, it's not there. And we've raised private funding. And these are projects that are economically viable. We should separate economically viable projects from social projects. And those ones are projects that I think people can invest in. We're going to come to the market, hopefully end of this year, early next year, with both a bond and equity instrument on Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, at least the Lagos-Shagamu end, which I think is significantly quite possible. So I think we need to have a conversation about what infrastructure people are willing to pay for and invest in those differently. Otherwise, this whole thing of 5% budgetary approval and allocation for projects, you know, and by the way, you lose half of that on mobilization, demobilization, and iteration. So it never gets done. So effectively, every year you only get to do 1 or 2% of the work. So that means it's going to take you 30 years, sometimes 50 years to finish a project. So taking them out, what we've done with this, and it's called the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund, is to take these 3 road projects, and we took Mambila Power out of it also to address and come up with a project finance structure to finish it. We should do more of that, I think, for other key projects. But at the same time, we must focus our minds to what is economically viable and deal with those differently from the social aspects of our projects. Perhaps that we can make some progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uche, for those comments. I'll quickly go to Mrs. Awoshika and Hadiza, if you have any more comments to very quickly add that before we go to our closing. Okay,
Well, like
I said, looks like we have
Royal Majesty can you hear me?
Yeah, your screen was a bit frozen. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I was saying, like Uche said, only His Royal Majesty can ask. Can ask the kind of questions that he did, and especially the first one. Yeah. And the question is, who will answer it? Is it the citizens or the people who sit in the same chambers that seek to question? Because who's going to pass the law or make the necessary changes for that to happen? So those are, but you know, aligning with what you just said again as well, it would be a shame to waste your pain. And what COVID-19, since that's the anchor to our discussions for today, what it has done is to expose our weaknesses and to show our limitations. And like we will do in our businesses, is forcing us to rethink, to reevaluate, and to make strict strategic decisions that will help our businesses to survive. And as a nation as well, that's something we need to do. But the question is that something that we will do? And do we have a system to force that conversation to take place and to force the right decisions to be agreed on and executed? I'll park that there and leave that for us
to digest.
I think the rest of it, I think between Uche and Sumaila, they've already given a good answer to the infrastructure issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ma. Hadiza, you've talked a lot about, you know, the investment in the area of infrastructure that is of immediate concern to you, but just in case you have any last comments or views to share with the audience following His Royal Highness comments or questions.
Thank you so much, Olu. Royal Highness, we appreciate your I'll say putting that out for everybody. This issue you raise is beyond this panel. It's something that is imperative for federal government to look at, more so that in the last few months we've realized that we don't need to do all those things that we've been doing. For example, all the travels. If every agency looks at how much it has saved in this last 4 months, they'll be able to realize that all of these things that we've been doing are absolutely unnecessary. necessary. And yes, our government is bloated, and those key tough decisions needs to be taken. But then who's going to take it? Those people that are in there in the National Assembly, will they want to leave? Those people that are approving all those so-called travels, will they want to stop it? So I think there needs to be strong political will to have this conversation and be very honest about it. Literally, I sit and I see people right now when there's a lockdown asking and inviting me for a meeting to a National Assembly, inviting me for a public hearing. So I find those things ridiculous when you know where it is. Can we not do it online? No. People don't like all of these virtual meetings because it also, as I keep referencing, it doesn't allow for avenue for rent seeking. So we need to sort of understand where we are as a country and look at what has happened with COVID and see that we functioned. So why do we need all of these things when we know we can actually operate without having to have those one-on-one? So yes, it's important, but key actors need to come in so that we can talk about it. But everybody within their little circle, in terms of their own workspace and what they do, they need to relook at their operational overheads beyond federal government writing to us and saying, oh, you need to reduce 25% of your budget. There's much, much more than that. We need to go down and look at the deep dives of what this budgetary provision provide. And just to quickly speak on leapfrog from what Uche mentioned about economically viable projects, it's also important to tie them to revenue. For us, for example, there's if this project is not revenue generating or it doesn't prevent a revenue leakage, then what's the value of it? So there's a lot of all of this project that sits on various budgets across the MDAs, and you wonder why they're there. So yes, one of the first questions you need to ask is, does it improve my revenue? Does it plug a revenue leakage? What is the direct value addition of this project to what I'm doing before it's on the budget? And some of these budget defenses that are done, I think executive needs to look at their own budget defense type and strategy to say, okay, within ourselves, let's do our own budget defense and go nitty-gritty into some of these blank projects that you cannot even define why they're in any budget at all. So this is just my last word on it. And yes, this big conversation around our bloated public sector needs to be addressed to enable us move forward as a country. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to everybody on the panel and to His Royal Highness, who was an honorary panelist and moderator as well. I'll bring our session to a close. And again, I apologize for overrunning, but this was an interesting and fully engaged audience. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to ask all of the questions. We have over 100 questions, and apologies for the people who've taken the time to join us and pose questions that we were not able to get to. But I do hope that you are inspired to do more in your own spheres as well. And then in closing, I think it's what's been important and what the various themes that have been discussed by all the panelists and some of the questions that have come out is just that as follows, that despite our challenges, we have shown tremendous resilience and solidarity. We have sufficient natural resources and human intellect, as evidenced by this panel, to build a society for shared prosperity. I hope that current crisis provides the final ingredient that is required, which goes to His Royal Highness's question, which is the political will for change, and to radically alter the path of our country towards the Nigeria of our dreams, not just for ourselves, but also for people of African descent all over the world. I would like to thank our esteemed panelists today for taking the time to share their thoughts, their experience, and their ideas for our future. I'd like to thank our audience for participating and contributing to this rich conversation, which apparently we need more of. Finally, I'd like to thank our hosts, EChapel, for providing a platform and convening this gathering. This is our penultimate weekly of the weekly seminars. And the 10th and last one, but according to feedback, we need more. The last one that was planned is for next week, and it will feature the Vice President of the Nation, Professor Yemi Osibanjo, and Dr. Okonjo Iweala. We look forward to having you join us for another rich discussion. Apart from these sessions, we've also gifted at EChapel respirators and fed 10,000 homes in 3 states, and will feed another 6,000 homes in Kano, Lagos, Ogun, and Edo states. We've provided PPE to medical corps, and so this goes back to the point around the need for us to do more in our individual spheres and not wait for our government. With that, we bring this session to a close. Have a good evening and happy Democracy Day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. It was fun. And
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was an interesting.
Enjoy your evening. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the
Thank
rest of
you.
your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Royal Highness, thank you very much.
Thank you, Coin. Bye.